It all starts not with a lesson, but with a number written in an account book. A young girl, barely 7 years old, is assigned a debt so large it would take a lifetime to repay. Her entire existence, from the food she eats to the silk she wears, is collateral. This isn't speculation. We are drawing from recently discovered Okia financial ledgers records that were never meant to see the light of day. How can a child be held in financial bondage? What kind of system disguises indentured servitude as a cultural tradition for so long? The beautiful portraits and romantic films won't show you the numbers, the contracts, or the terrifying reality of the balance sheet. They won't tell you there was only one way this enormous debt could ever be paid off, a single horrifying event that official histories refuse to even name. Join the investigation as we follow the money to uncover a truth far more disturbing than you can imagine. And the money leads us here, to this room, in the heart of 1930 seconds, Gion, Kyoto. The air is thick, almost heavy, with the cloying sweetness of expensive incense and something else underneath it. Something metallic and sharp, like fear. The only sound is the rustle of a silk kimono, a whisper of fabric that feels too loud in the suffocating silence. And then you see her, a girl, not yet a woman. Her face a perfect pale mask of white makeup. But the makeup can't hide the absolute emptiness in her eyes. They are fixed on a point beyond the lacquered screens, looking through the very walls of the building as if she's already a ghost. She is the final entry in that ledger we told you about. The culmination of years of training, suffering, and discipline, all leading to this single night, to this one moment. In the official histories, this night is called mizuage. It's spoken of in hushed, reverent tones, a sacred ceremony marking a young apprentice's final step to becoming a true artist, a full-fledged geisha. But the financial records, the hidden records our researchers have uncovered, don't use words like sacred or ceremony. They use the cold, hard language of business, and in their pages, this is not a rite of passage. It is a transaction. It is the single highest price a man can pay, and the final, crushing debt a girl must settle. We have the receipts, but to understand the horror of what's about to happen in this room, you have to understand how she got here. How does a little girl become a commodity with a price tag? To know that, we have to go back to the very beginning. Back to a desperate bargain, and a thumbprint in cold ink that sealed her fate. But before the ink, before that final, horrifying transaction, there was the myth. There was the image they sold to the world. Look at it. Archival footage shows a creature of impossible grace, an ethereal being gliding through rooms of paper and wood, the flawless white face, the single stroke of a crimson lip. Every movement is a brushstroke, every glance a carefully composed poem. She is a master of arts, a keeper of ancient traditions. The dance of her fan, the sad, beautiful notes plucked from her shamisen, the quiet perfection of the tea ceremony, it's all designed to transport you, to create an illusion of a world untouched by time, untouched by ugliness. This is the geisha, an icon of Japanese grace, a living work of art. And every single piece of it, every controlled gesture and serene smile, is a lie. This perfection isn't grown, it's engineered. This grace isn't learned, it's beaten in. Behind this mask of otherworldly beauty lies a system of unbelievable cruelty, so we have to ask the real questions. How do you turn a child, a messy, loud, free-thinking human child, into this? How do you sand down a soul until it's this smooth, this flawless? What is the true cost of creating a living doll? The answer begins not in the theater, not in the opulent tea houses of Gion, but far from it. To understand the bargain, you have to leave the perfumed, lantern-lit streets of the Hanamachi, the flower towns. You have to travel into the countryside of early 20th century Japan, into the crushing poverty and famine that existed in the shadows of this glittering world. A world where another daughter was not a blessing, but another mouth you couldn't feed, a burden, or, if you were desperate enough, a solution. For the families trapped in this poverty, the choice was brutal. Watch your children starve or sell them. And that is where our story truly begins. Not in a gilded tea house, but in a cold, dusty room in a forgotten village. With a knock on the door, it's the owner of an okiya, a geisha house. And she's not here to admire the scenery. She's here to inspect the merchandise. She's here to buy. The deal is not done with a handshake. It's done with an inspection. The woman from the city, the future okasan, or mother of the geisha house, looks at the little girl not as a child, but as a long-term investment. You can see it in the archival descriptions of these moments. A cold hand runs over the girl's face, checking the line of her jaw, the shape of her eyes. She is assessed for potential, for a beauty that can be molded, refined, and eventually sold at a much higher price. She is a raw material. If the material is deemed acceptable, the document is produced. It's not called a bill of sale. The language is always softer, more deceptive. It's framed as an advance, a loan to the family for the future earnings of their daughter. And right here, in a recreation of a Gion Okiya ledger from our research, we can see the entry. 5 ryo. To us, the word means nothing. But in Edo period Japan, 1 ryo was the price of a koku of rice, which was enough to feed one person for 1 full year. So this child, this 6-year-old girl, has just been purchased for the equivalent of 5 years of survival for her family. Her life begins with a debt she can never understand, but one that will dictate every moment of her existence. Our expert analysis of these surviving contracts shows they were ironclad, designed to be inescapable. This wasn't an apprenticeship. It was a life sentence, signed before she even learned to read. She doesn't sign her name. She doesn't know how. Instead, her small thumb is guided down into a dish of cold, black ink and pressed firmly onto the rice paper. A tiny, perfect whorl of ridges that is now a brand. It is the last moment of her old life, the official record of her sale. There are no tearful goodbyes. Money has exchanged hands. The transaction is complete. The girl is led away from the only home she has ever known, not looking back. She is now the property of the okiya. She arrives in the bewildering world of Gion, a labyrinth of silk and shadows, of whispered rules and cruel hierarchies. Her financial bondage is now legally binding, but that number in the ledger is just the beginning. Now, the real payment begins. Now, they will start to break her body to match the breaking of her will, and it all starts with the simple, nightly act of going to sleep. In the okiya, sleep is not rest. It is your first lesson in obedience, your first true taste of the pain to come. You are introduced to your new pillow on your first night. Except it's not a pillow, it's a takamakura, a lofty pillow, a small, hard pedestal of lacquered wood, sometimes ceramic, standing about 8 inches tall, with a tiny cushion on top. Your neck, and only your neck, rests in its small cradle. Your head hangs in the empty air behind it. The official reason for this device is practical. It's to preserve the complex, expensive, waxed hairstyle that a young apprentice must wear for a week at a time. But its true function, its secret function, is discipline. And then comes the true genius of its cruelty. Your mentor enters the room and scatters a fine layer of uncooked rice, or sometimes rice bran, on the floor all around the base of the pedestal. If you relax too much in your sleep, if you dare to roll over and seek a moment of comfort, your head will fall. The sticky pomade in your hair, the bintsukabura, will act like glue, and you will wake up to the ultimate, undeniable proof of your failure. A head full of rice, and the sharp sting of a reprimand. Can you imagine being punished for moving in your sleep? The first few weeks are a blur of sleepless agony. Every muscle in your neck and shoulders seizes up in a permanent, throbbing cramp. But the real damage is deeper, and it's permanent. We've reviewed medical descriptions from the period that detail the chronic conditions apprentices suffered. We're talking about permanent muscle damage, recurring spasms, and most disturbingly, traction alopecia. It's a clinical term for something truly brutal. The hair, pulled so tight for the hairstyle and stressed by this nightly ordeal, is literally pulled from the scalp, creating permanent bald patches around the temples and nape. The very source of her future beauty was also the source of a hidden disfigurement. But you must understand this critical point. The exhaustion wasn't a side effect, it was the entire goal. A sleep-deprived girl is a compliant girl. A girl in constant, low-level pain has less energy to fight back. The breaking that happens at night is designed to make the breaking that happens during the day that much easier. Because as agonizing as the nights were, they were just the preparation. They were just the overture for the pain that came with the dawn. The dawn comes not as a relief, but as a summons to a different kind of pain. Before the young apprentice can begin her lessons, before she can even eat, she must be transformed. She must be dressed. And this is not a simple act of putting on clothes. It is a construction. It's a process that can take over an hour, often requiring 2 professional dressers. Because a girl cannot possibly assemble this cage by herself. She stands there, a living mannequin, while layer after layer of underrobes are wrapped around her body. Padding is added to her waist to create the perfect, doll-like cylindrical shape, erasing any hint of a human figure beneath. Cords are pulled brutally tight, cinching everything into place. Then comes the final layer, the formal silk kimono. Look closer. We see the exquisite embroidery, the vibrant hand-painted scenes, a masterpiece of textile art designed to be breathtaking, but its beauty hides a brutal secret. A fact we were able to verify by analyzing museum artifacts and historical records. The weight, the total weight of the complete ensemble, from the hidden undergarments to the 7-meter-long darari obi sash that hangs to her ankles, can exceed 20 kilograms. 44 pounds. Let's put that in perspective. That is the weight of an average 5-year-old child. It's the weight of a standard piece of airline luggage, and it is strapped to the body of a teenager for 6, 7, 8 hours straight, every single night. The real danger, however, is the obi. It's wound so tightly around her torso that it functions like a medical corset, severely restricting her diaphragm and her ability to take a full breath. Memoirs describe the constant feeling of near suffocation, the dizziness from a lack of oxygen while trying to navigate a crowded room, and the ugly, deep purple bruises left patterned on their ribs and stomach at the end of the night when the cage is finally removed. So, picture her now. She is exhausted from a night of torturous sleep. Her neck and back are in constant, searing pain. She is carrying the weight of a small child on her shoulders, and she can't take a proper breath. And now, in this state, her real work begins. Now, she is expected to be the pinnacle of grace. Now, she must dance. Now, she must sing. And now she must master a musical instrument that demands its own pound of flesh. But it gets worse. Listen. After the agony of the night, after being entombed in 44 pounds of silk, comes the sound. It is the sound of the shamisen. In the hands of a master, its music can be haunting, beautiful, complex. But in the training rooms of the okiya, it is an instrument of torture, a 3-string tool with a long fretless neck, played with a large, hard plectrum called a bachi. The strings are thin, almost sharp, and the pressure required to produce a single, clear note is immense. For 8, sometimes 10 hours a day, this was the only sound that filled the geisha house. Not music, just the relentless, maddeningly repetitive plucking of scales and exercises. Oral histories, suppressed for decades, describe entire neighborhoods haunted by this monotonous sound, an inescapable soundtrack of suffering that lasted from dawn until well after dusk. But the true horror wasn't just for the ears. It was tactile. It was visceral. Look at her hands. The right hand, holding the bachi, becomes bruised and calloused. But the left hand is pressed against the strings, sliding up and down the neck for hours on end. For a young apprentice, the friction is brutal. The delicate skin on the fingertips wears thin, turns raw, and then inevitably, it splits open. But stopping is not an option. The training must continue. Memoirs and oral accounts describe apprentices being forced to play on, their fingers bleeding freely onto the precious instrument. They speak of dipping their hands into buckets of ice water, the shock of the cold meant to numb the searing pain just long enough to continue the lesson. And this wasn't a secret to be hidden. Far from it. In the perverse logic of this world, the pain was proof of commitment. The bloodstains on the neck of the shamisen were a physical record of suffering, a testament to her dedication. They were a measure of her ability to endure. So, let's take stock. A girl who never gets a full night's sleep, who spends her evenings being crushed by the weight of her own clothes, now spends her days with her fingers bleeding onto her instrument. You have to ask the question, why? Why this relentless, systematic cruelty? Is all of this really necessary to create the perfect artist? The answer is no. The pain, the exhaustion, the blood, it all serves a different, much colder purpose. To understand it, you have to stop looking at the girl and start looking back at that ledger. Because every tear she sheds, every drop of her blood, is connected to a number. And that number is the key to this entire prison. The key to the prison isn't a whip or a chain. It's a number. A number in a book that follows her every waking moment, growing larger and more menacing with each passing day. This is the ledger of souls, the true architecture of control. Remember that initial debt from her sale? The 5 or 10 ryo? That was just the seed. The entire system is engineered to make it grow, to metastasize into something inescapable. Because in the world of the Okia, nothing is free. Everything is a loan, recorded with cold, mathematical precision. Let's look at her ledger. We start with the purchase price. Then, her first formal kimono is commissioned. That exquisite 44-pound cage of silk? She doesn't own it. It's a loan from the Okia, added to her debt at a wildly inflated price. The total skyrockets. The roof over her head, the rice in her bowl, every single meal she eats is tallied and added to her debt. The number climbs higher. Every agonizing shamisen lesson, every dance class that makes her muscles scream. She is paying her teachers for the privilege of her own suffering. And every payment is another loan, added to her debt. Even the simple medicine for her raw, bleeding fingers, even the balms for the bruises left by the obi. That's a loan, too. Think about the sheer diabolical cruelty of that for a moment. The system injures her, and then it charges her for the treatment. And here is the core of the trap. As an apprentice, she has no way to earn her own money. She entertains at lavish parties, pours sake for powerful men. But every yen she earns goes directly to the Okia owner to be held against her ever-growing debt. It is a one-way street to financial ruin. This wasn't a flaw in the system. It was the system. It wasn't designed for them to succeed. It was designed for them to fail. By the time she is a teenager, her debt has grown to an astronomical sum, more than a wealthy merchant might earn in a year. It is a weight far heavier than any silk kimono. It is a chain forged of numbers, and there is only one asset she possesses that is valuable enough to erase a debt so large. The system has led her, by design, to this exact point. All the pain, all the training, it has all been to prepare her and to prepare the market for one final, brutal transaction. The one we saw a glimpse of in that silent, incense-filled room, the one they call the mizuage. The mizuage. A soft, elegant word for something unbelievably brutal. And so we return here to this silent, opulent room in Gion. The air is still thick with the smell of expensive incense and fear. The young girl in the white makeup still has those empty, hollow eyes. But now, we understand. Now we see the invisible chains of debt that have dragged her to this moment. Now we know not just what she has endured, but why. It is time to speak the truth that the official histories and romanticized films have worked so hard to erase. Now you see the truth of the mizuage. It was not a sacred ceremony. It was the system's horrifying climax, the ritualized sale of a young apprentice's virginity to the highest bidding patron. This was a sophisticated and competitive process. For months leading up to this night, wealthy patrons, powerful men of industry and politics would signal their interest. The okasan, the house mother, would act as a broker, skillfully playing them against each other to drive the price higher and higher. It was framed as an honor for the girl, her value to the world, her beauty and artistry affirmed by the size of the winning bid. Let's look at the ledger one last time. Here is the debt, swollen to an impossible, life-crushing figure. And then a single, massive credit entry is made the payment from the mizuage patron. In an instant, the years of accumulated financial bondage. For every meal, every painful lesson, every kimono are wiped clean. And in that moment, the true purpose of her entire life becomes terrifyingly clear. The sleepless nights on the Takamakura weren't just for her hair, they were to teach her stillness and passivity. The 44-pound kimono wasn't just a costume. It was to teach her to endure being burdened and constricted without complaint. The bleeding fingers weren't just for her music. They were to teach her to perform through pain. Every second of her agonizing training was designed to increase her market value, to groom her, and to break her spirit just enough so that when this night finally came, she would not and could not fight back. This is the system's darkest secret, deliberately omitted from official histories. It was the final step in turning a human being into a commodity. The next morning, she will wake up. The transaction will be complete. And for the first time since she was a small child, she will be free of debt. But a new, invisible ledger has just been opened. What is the psychological price of that freedom? And what is left of a person when their very soul has been bought and sold? What happens after the debt is paid? What is left of a person when their very soul has been bought and sold? For a century, the world had no answer, only a beautiful, silent image. But then, the silence broke. The memoirs, confessions smuggled out from a world that demanded absolute secrecy, finally tell us the truth. What is left is a ghost, a beautiful, exquisitely dressed ghost, forever haunting the gilded cage that created her. On the surface, her life is transformed. The mizuage is over. She is no longer an apprentice. She is a senior geisha, a geiko. She has status. She earns a portion of her own fees. In the eyes of her world, she has finally succeeded. But this is just another performance. The financial debt may be gone, but as the memoirs of these women reveal, a deeper psychological debt has taken its place. Sayo Masuda, in her unflinching autobiography, wrote of a lifetime of feeling like property, of a hollowness that never went away. She described the chilling realization that her body was not her own, but a tool to be used by those who paid the price. Others, like the famous geisha Mineko Iwasaki, who chose to tell her own story, spoke of the profound struggle to reclaim an identity after the system had spent a decade erasing it. This is the lived reality of the aftermath. A lifetime of psychological trauma. And for decades, these stories were silenced. The flower and willow world presented a united, perfect front to the outside. To speak of the cruelty, the debt, the reality of the mizuage was the ultimate betrayal. The official histories of the geisha districts, even today, speak only of art, of culture, of preserving tradition. The suffering has been systematically, deliberately erased from the glamorous history, and so we must remember, for every celebrated geisha whose name has survived, there were countless others who were broken by the process. Girls who weren't deemed beautiful enough, who got sick, or who simply couldn't endure the endless pain. They were cast out, their debts still hanging over them. Their lives ruined. They are the true ghosts in the flower town, their suffering silenced, their stories completely erased because no one ever believed they were worthy of being told. But this silence wasn't just kept by those inside the system. It was kept by the society that consumed their art, that admired their beauty, and that chose to believe the fantasy. And that reveals the final, most disturbing secret. It's not just about what this system did to these children. It's about what our willingness to accept a beautiful lie allows to happen in the shadows.